Well, some of the biggest names in Australian business have united to back reopening national plans ahead of GDP figures which are out today. For more, we're joined by Ben Oquist, the Executive Director of the Australia Institute. Great to see you, Ben. Tell us a bit more about what we're seeing. I think it's around 80 companies and their CEOs who are coming together at the moment.
Yeah, a call from big business attempting to back the idea that states don't go into lockdowns again, and that the states follow what they say is the Prime Minister's national plan to open up. I think probably the danger here is that big business is pushing the government to do something that is not as concrete as people think. There is no Freedom Day coming, if you like, when borders will magically open up and all lockdowns will be gone, all restrictions will be lifted. In fact, what the government's national plan suggests is that states will have freedom to move differently depending on the levels of vaccination and depending upon the levels of virus in their community. And essentially, you're going to have states doing different things. And as Western Australian Premier Mike McGowan says, is that we don't want to have a plan that living with COVID becomes dying with COVID. And the McGowan, the Western Australian Premier, is obviously in a different position to other states. The Western Australian economy is doing well. There are no restrictions and no COVID. So the problem for business is that any rush to reopen unsafely is likely to cause not just a lot of health harm, of course, but a lot of economic harm as well, as people will put in place their own restrictions if they're worried about being infected with COVID. The Prime Minister has made much lately of saying that we need a safe plan, and his plan is a safe plan to open up. But the reality is that only 27% of the full population is fully vaccinated at the moment, if you take into account children as well. And the government's own Doherty modelling shows that to open up safely requires not just high levels of vaccination, and we're nowhere near that yet, but also a good health system, good ICU units, the staff to look after people in hospitals, and critically, the ability to still contact, trace, test, isolate and quarantine, or TTIQ as the modelling called. And that capability has been diminished, of course, as New South Wales run. So we've got to get those other settings right if we're going to reopen up safely, which is, of course, good for the community and good for business and the economy.
So just having a closer look at part of the report, so chief executives from 80 companies employing almost 1 million people placed an open letter to the major newspapers on Wednesday, including the Australian Financial Review, basically calling on the state premiers, as you mentioned, to stay the course. So the reason why I bring that up is because the Liberal Party, of course, in power federally at the moment, they do listen to business, of course. That's part of the way that they do run. So would you say that this there'll be a tension caused by this? 80 of the biggest chief executives in Australia. Do you think the Prime Minister will listen to this?
No doubt. That's what big business hopes, and they can have the ear of government. I think the danger for big business in pushing to open up too early is that they put the community at risk. The reality is that only 27% of Australians are fully vaccinated if you look at the percentage of the whole population. And the government's own Doherty modelling says you need to do three things to ensure that you can open up safely. Let's have a hospital system that can cope with it. Let's have high vaccination rates, and critically, be able to still contact, trace, test, isolate and quarantine effectively and easily. That TTIQ figure is really important. And unfortunately, with the wave in New South Wales in particular, the country's ability to test, trace and isolate and quarantine is diminished. And unless we can put in more resources to get better contact tracing going so we can cope with the wave, there's going to be too many COVID deaths, too many people with COVID. So the Prime Minister has been keen to point out that his plan is a safe plan to reopen. But the reality is we need a stronger health system in place, that contact tracing as well as the vaccination rate. And I think probably for business, the danger for them is that they look a bit hypocritical. They've kind of led the charge for lower taxes in a smaller state, And now it comes to the crunch. It's clear we need a stronger state, a stronger government with the ability to roll out vaccinations, have a strong hospital system with good ICU, and that ability to contact trace that only the government can do. So I think business has got itself in a tricky position, having argued for so long that we need a smaller role for government and a smaller state, to suddenly realising that in times like this you need a strong state, not just for the health of the community and their safety, but of course for the economy overall.
Yeah, it's a really interesting one. It just feels like there's a lot of information coming from many different sectors at the moment. So it's going to be whether we can get a plan on track and we become a little bit more clear, because I think a lot of people in Australia right now would love a very clear plan. Ben, thanks so much for your time, mate. We'll talk soon.
Thanks, Adrian.
The bottom 20% get nothing. They're really unfair tax cuts.
People want to see much stronger action from the government when it comes to climate change.
It's no coincidence that we have a wages crisis in Australia.
Transitioning to net zero emissions, it doesn't seem like there's much room for gas.